any person comes there. Right. Hopefully the stream starts shortly. Great. I think we are live now on YouTube. So if ground rules, if you have any question, please feel free to use the Q&A or the chat. I do read the chat when I take some short breaks. Also, you can unmute yourself. That's the essence of the session, for you to be able to ask questions. So you can unmute yourself and ask a question. The only thing I recommend is, if I'm in the process of explaining something, try to wait for me to finish the explanation. Then you can bring in your question. I hope we are good to start. Today, we are continuing with our previous session where we were introduced to Django. Django. We're introduced to Django. Great. And we created a first application. So a quick recap of what we did the last time. We learned about the essence of a web framework. What is a web framework and why we need a web framework? We also learned about what Django is and why we need a virtual environment when we are creating some of this. That reminds me. So there was a question that was thrown the last time. I think it was Mawilila that asked that particular question. And the question was, or it was someone else, I've forgotten. But the question was, do we need to, if you are creating node applications, do you also need virtual environment just as we have in Python? And I think it caught my attention because I advise that for every application that you are developing, it's always good to separate it from your system, right? Keep all the packages separate. And even before I ended, I was reflecting on it. I realized I have never used a virtual environment for all the node applications I've built. And at least I've built a couple of them, but it has never occurred to me to use a virtual environment. So this, after the session, it was one of the things that I was very curious about to go and find out. So let's talk about that first before. That means if you are using any other programming language, because the that I think so far it's only in Python that I have personally used a virtual environment before, right? I think it's only in Python, if I'm not mistaken. So the question is why? And when I went to read around it, I realized that, no, stop this. So there is a concept of global and local models. And depending on the programming language you are using, this may be the whole package management in that particular programming language may be a bit different. So globally installed packages, that is a package that is, when I install it, it is on my computer such that any other application on my computer has access to it. Then locally installed ones are the ones that are specific to your project. When you install them, they are only available to your project. So it turns out that by default, Python installs the packages, that is, if you are using, for instance, pip to do your installation, it installs it globally by default. It installs it globally. But on the other hand, when you are using Node or Node.js with something like npm, it's by default installs it locally. And I hope this makes sense. So if I go ahead and I install pip install Django on my laptop right now, if I do pip install Django on my computer right now, by default, Python is installing globally. So it is going to take over on my computer itself. such that any other application, Django application or Django project that I am going to start is going to use that global Django installation, which we are advising against when you are using a virtual environment, right? So, but for the node applications, by default, they are locally scoped. So the packages are only installed for the environment or the project that you are working in. That's why we do not need a separate virtual environment for the node application, but you need one for a Python application. I hope that makes sense. I don't know if you guys get it. Okay. Thank
Yes.
you. All right, great. Yeah. So let me, I think I have a message in the chat that says that you didn't understand it well. Yeah. So guys, what I'm saying is this, that when I do, if let's say I'm in a node project and I do, let's assume that my node project is called news blog. We are building a node project and I've called it news blog. Immediately you create or you install Node or Express.js and the likes. As soon as you initiate this project, you are going to have your package or JSON, but in addition to that, you're going to have what we refer to as node models. So there is a directory like that called node models. And every package that you install will be kept within this particular folder or directory. So this is known as locally scoped, because this folder is only present in the project that you are working in. So if you go ahead and you do npm install and you install any package at all, say .env, npm install.env, this package will be installed locally in this project. So it is only things inside this project that have access to it. So it's like by default, it's already acting as a virtual environment. It has separated itself from the others. So we don't need to create another virtual environment and put these things in. But if this news blog was a Python project, say a Django project, what is happening is that once you install this directory and you go ahead and use pip install, pip will install this globally. So everything that pip installs is available to your whole computer and every other project on your computer. So imagine if I go ahead and I install a package like python.env. This python.env is available globally. So every other project on my computer will be using this. So that is when a conflict can results, because we can have different versions of python.env on the same computer. And now there is going to be that conflict. Maybe for your project, you needed a specific version, but it's using a different version. Even for Python itself, sometimes you are using this particular version of Python for your project, but then that is not what is working. Those of you who have ever experienced it before, where you had Python version 2 and Python version 3 on your computer, it's very frustrating. Sometimes when you are not aware, you write the command Python to run something and it's running with Python 2. And for that matter, the thing is giving you errors when it was not supposed to give you errors. That's where the conflict is coming in. So Python by default is installing stuff globally. So if we want to narrow its scope to only our project, then we have to create a virtual environment and put it inside it. I hope that makes sense. So that was just to explain the question that came up during our last session. All right, so let's get to it. In this session, let me bring up my VS Code. VS Code, where are you? Django. Great. So this was the last project that we did. Those of you who were not here, you can watch the previous video and do the assignment in there and you get to this point. But all that we have done so far in this particular project is to install Django and start a Django project. That is all. So install Django and start a Django project. But then we also created a virtual environment. So let me bring up right virtual environments and go ahead and activate our virtual environment. So to activate the virtual environments, env, then scripts, then activate, right? Okay, great. So now it has been activated. What I want us to learn today, okay, even before I come to it, let me explain a concept. In Django, we have two terminologies that usually confuse people. So let's explain that before we come back here. There's a concept of projects, a Django project, versus the concept of app, a Django app. So with what we have started so far, it's a project that we are doing. So if you remember, one of the commands that we ran was Django admin, then start project, and we gave the project name to be news blog. That was the command that we used to create our project. This project is like the whole thing that you are about to do. So I'm about to create a website. I'm about to create an e-commerce platform. I'm about to create whatever project that you are doing. That is a project. But then practically each project contains various models. So for instance, in our news blog, if you visit a news site, right, this news blog that we are creating, if you visit a news site, there are concepts like there are articles. So we can have articles here. There are what? Comments. We can have comments. What else? Maybe this news blog has a newsletter that people can subscribe to. There are other things. Say the users can sign up to this. What else can we have on a news site? You guys think about any other thing that we can have on a
Hello,
news
Doc.
site.
Is
All right.
comments the same as reviews? Maybe we can add reviews.
Yeah, so it depends on how you want. For news blog, I think because it's not products, it's not really reviews like that. But yeah, it depends on however you look at it. So what I'm trying to explain here is that when you're building an application or the project is a big thing, but then this big thing is made up of models, like smaller bits, right? You'd have to think through it. So Tracy, this is one of the key things that you consider when you think about building any big project. It is very big, but then in as much as it's big, it can be broken down into simpler components. And these components can stand on their own and they have their own meaning, and a lot of things can go into it. Right. So for instance, let's say we want to build an application like WhatsApp. All right. A messaging app like WhatsApp. WhatsApp has several features that we may have to consider. So we can have different models, like say, give me examples. The test chats. So there can be test chats. There can even be video chats. There is the concept of groups. There is now the concept of communities. What else is there? Course. Yes. Oh, you guys don't use WhatsApp.
Doc, channels.
Channels. Yes. There is a part concerning security. There is another part concerning notification. Like all those individual features that are in there, you have to be able to break them down and say, okay, there is this component of my application. There is this other component. There is this other component. Does that make sense? That's the first part of every application that you're building. You are looking at being able to break it down into all of these individual components. In Django, these individual components are referred to as apps. We call them apps in Django. So that is one thing that you have to pay attention to. So we have the project, which is the main thing that you are trying to build. Then the component of that project, which are usually independent of themselves. So if you take each component, that component can be considered as an app. It is one thing that confuses a lot of people. That's why I decided to take it from this side. Always, usually, I keep saying this thing during my sessions that when I'm teaching, I like to take you from what you already know to bring you to what you do not know. So the concept of apps is nothing but the individual components that make up the application or the whole project. So we are going to create apps. And in Django, when you create an app within a project, it is a separate folder. So the app is a separate folder, and very soon you'll be seeing it. We can create as many apps as possible. So big projects contains a lot of applications, a lot of apps. Don't be confused about the concept of app, and don't think of apps as something like a whole unique Django project on itself. No. In other programming languages, they may be called differently. In fact, you can just call it a model. But in Django, the term that they use is app. That's all that you need to remember. So for instance, so can we call the individual component a microservice? I don't think you call it a microservice. I mean, the microservice is now more of a reserved word for a concept, those DevOps concepts. So I don't think we will call it as such. Okay. But just think about it, because it's not necessarily, let me show you a practical example of code base that I have. Okay. So this is an e-commerce platform that we are working on. And let me show you something. If you check here, all of these, so I have controllers, forget about that, right? Focus on this. I have what we call agro service. I have analytics, announcement, auth, blog, cart, categories, category question, inquiry. So in Django, each of these can be considered as an app. This is like, oh, I've created all the functions relating to agro service within this agro service.js. So on the page, there is on the project that we are working on, the e-commerce platform, there is something called agro service. Whatever it is, every code that I am writing will be captured under this agro service. Then anything that has to do with the analytics of the website or application that we are working on will be captured under the analytics component. Everything that has to do with announcements will be captured here. So you see, by the time you are done with building an application, which is like a big application, you get a lot of these models, a lot of them. But in Django, these are called apps. Does that make sense? Yes, yes. You guys get it? Please. We are
Yes.
back. You have to be giving me the amen and hallelujah, When I'm preaching like that and it is entering the spirit, you have to let me keep quiet. Yeah, I should preach on. Thank you. You are in the spirit, fellas. Yeah. So that's it. The concept of apps. Just break down your project into the various components. So if you see, let me show you practically with the same example that I showed earlier. This is what we usually do in other programming languages when you are trying to do. Oh, why don't you want to come? When you're trying to do the MVC, this is what we usually do. So we have a folder for the controllers. We have a folder for the models. This, I am working as a backend developer, so I don't have views here. The views will be catered for by the front-end developers. But you see that in the controllers, we have agro service here. Then these are just functions that deal with the agro service. So create an agro service, you come here, delete agro service, update agro service. So all of those are contained within the agro service controller. But when you come to the models, we also have agro service model. So in it all depends on you. It's just called an architecture. How you architect your project is totally up to you. But if you are using a framework, most frameworks are opinionated. They give you restrictions to how this is supposed to be handled, that how this is supposed to be handled. The framework I'm using in this particular project is Express.js, and Express is not opinionated like that. So you decide. I could have decided to create all my everything regarding agro service in one folder or directory and not separate them this way. But what I wanted to do is to follow the common architecture that a lot of people are used to, which is the MVC architecture. Because the code base you are writing today, tomorrow you will not be the one, you may not be the one handling it. Another person will be handling it, and it has to be something that they can easily appreciate. Okay. But in Django, we don't separate them like this. We separate them based on the functionality. So if it is agro service, you have to create a folder for agro service. And within agro service, you are going to have the agro service views. You are going to have agro service models. You are going to have agro service routes. You are going to have the templates as well. I hope that makes sense. So that is just a way that we organize files in Django. You may find it as being different from other applications, but in Django, this is how they work. So by those few words, I hope I've been able to convince you about what Django apps are. We needed to appreciate that before we delve into what we need to do today. So today we're going to look at the Django app the Django app. I want to stop saying Django app and start saying Django project, because when you say app, it starts confusing people. App, Django app is a different concept, but Django project, the project that we have created has a couple of files in here. And my goal is by the end of this, you should understand every file that is in your Django project and its role and what you need to do. That's the very first thing that I want us to appreciate, even before we start writing any code. Remember, we have not written any code so far. The output that we saw the last time is not code that we wrote. That's the foundation that Django has laid for us. But there are a few other things, and we need to appreciate how all of these things are coming together. So the very first one that we want to talk about is the manage.py. And the last time I explained it, but just a quick overview. When we started, there was a utility file or two called Django admin. If you guys remember that I introduced you to, and that's what we even use to create or start the Django project. Once you install Django, you have access to that utility tool. Those of you who are in ALS and have worked on Airbnb console projects, this comes in handy. Like the way you build that your console so that when you give it commands, it's able to respond. That's how the Django admin has been built, so that you can interact with Django through that utility tool. And which other thing? Simple shell. We built something like that in ALS, right? That you can execute simple shell and execute commands with your simple shell. So in Python, I think the commonest or the example that I can really relate it with is those of you who did the Airbnb console, that particular project. At least it gives you an idea of how this works. So if I write here Django admin, it gives me how this utility should be used. So these are various commands. It tells you that, and I think any of you, is there, okay, apart from I think I've seen Adeole here, but the rest of you, has anyone done the console project? Those of you who are from ALS, has anyone done console project?
Yes, Doc. We did it like 1 month ago.
Okay, great, great. So if you can recall exactly, You were asked to do something like this so that if the person is not using your commands right, you give them a help that tells them that, okay, no, this is exactly how to use this. This is exactly, that's if my memory serves me right. Okay. So it's a similar thing that's happening here. It's just telling us that, okay, this is not the right way to use Django admin. These are the sub commands. And if you want any help with how to use a specific sub command, just type Django admin help and enter the sub command. So these are the sub commands. But this is a general tool that we have. It does not have any information regarding the settings of our project as we have it. So another tool or a wrapper has been built around it called manage.py. And in here, this is just setting our settings, everything in our settings, which is this place. So if you go to news blog and you go to settings, if I open news blog, you see settings here. So everything in here, these are just declarations. So variable declarations. We'll come and explain every one of them. But what manage.py is doing is that it is setting the environment variables. So this is more of a setting an environment variable Django settings model, and it will contain all these variables that are defined in your settings. So now you are still going to use the Django admin. If you go ahead and follow exactly what this is doing, this function is doing, you would realize that it is using Django admin. So if you are curious and you really want to understand the code that Django has, the code base that has been written for you already. Remember, that is not your work when you are developing applications using Django. Your work is just to install this and add on your own code base. But if you are really interested in the behind the scene, what is really happening, because when you understand it, you can always trick Django to do the things that you want it to do. You can always click on this code command if you are using VS Code. I don't know about others, but if you're using VS Code, you can hold command and click this, and it's going to take you to where that function is. So this is where the actual function is. You see, and this function is also calling management utility and executing it. But then if you're interested, you can go to management utility and see what is in there. And by the time you realize this is just acting like Django admin, this is what encapsulates the logic of the Django admin and manage.py utilities. So essentially, if you check how Django admin works, it's similar to exactly how manage.py works. The only difference is that before manage.py works, it sets some environment variables. And these environment variables are variables that we have defined in our application. So if the difference between using Django admin and manage.py is that if you use Django admin, it doesn't know these variables that you have in your settings. It doesn't know them. But there are things that you need it to know. We will get to the settings so that you know exactly what is in there. So for that matter, as soon as you create your project, I will advise that you stop using the Django admin and stick to manage.py. So that is what the file is. You can see all of these are in here. Django is in here. All the files that have been created. So if you are interested, you can start exploring all of those files. But for now, let's focus on what we are supposed to be doing. So that's exactly what manage.py is doing. It's just a utility that allows us to run the commands that I showed you earlier. Now, the other thing, this we created by ourselves, the requirement.tsc, we created it by ourselves by putting in the various packages that we've installed, the specific versions of those packages. db.sqlite was created when we ran the server to launch our application, and you see why shortly in the settings. All these, the name here is coming from some part of our settings. Then env was what we called our virtual environment. So that's, we created it. By default, what Django created for us when we started the project was the name of the project, this directory. Then it created manage.py. So those were the only two that came. Then when we were about to run the server, it generated this for us. So how is that? Let's go into our project. Inside the project file, this particular file that you see here, or directory that you see here, if you did ALS and you did Python in ALS, by now you would know what it is. And I think that's one of the reasons why I appreciate what we're learning in ALS a lot. Because these are things that people, when they are teaching, will hardly make mention of it. But anyway, this is just the cache that is generated when you import something from a model. Okay, so it is not you who created it, and we don't need it in any way. I can even delete it. And when I run the code again, if there is a file that is importing a model from this package, then it's going to come back again. Okay, then for __ init __ .py, this file here is just an empty file that turns this directory into a package. And when someone asks how much Python should we know to be able to appreciate this, I mentioned that we need to know something about packages, models, something like that. So this is put here to make this a package. That means that we can easily import from this particular directory. We can import any of these as packages in anywhere in our application or our project. Okay, so that is why this file is here. Now, let me jump this. I'll explain it shortly, but let's go to settings. And there's a lot of things in settings, so please pay attention. A lot. And I mean a lot of things. And if you really understand settings or the things in settings, it's going to go a long way to help you. So Django is such that there are a lot of components in the code base that has been given to us. And each of them are independent of the other. So anytime that you fix something in Django, anytime that you add something, you have to do a configuration. You have to go and tell something that, oh, I just put this here. So if you are looking for it, find it here. Like Django is that configurable. You have to almost always go and configure something. So please remember this statement that I've made right now. Almost always go and configure something. So if you wrote a new code somewhere, there's a high likelihood that you have to go and do a setting somewhere and say, okay, I've just added this. I'm saying this to inform you so that it doesn't become confusing the moment we start moving around. So you should expect it that, oh, even though you are creating something here, it is not working. The reason why it's not working is because you've not told this thing that this is here. They are independent of each other. So the only way that you can ensure that everyone is aware that this exists here is by going to tell. Once you create this, tell this one that, yeah, this is here. And the settings is one of such places where you would come often to report new things that you have added. But then inside the settings, all we are doing is variables and their values, which when we run, remember, we'll be using manage.py to run most of the commands in this application. And for that matter, when we run that, it's now export all the variables here as environment variables or a list of environment variables. That means that our project can now access it directly from the environment variables. Okay. And good for us, there are some notes in here, comments, documentation that helps us. If you want more information about this, go to this. And this particular import is just importing path, which we can call the path class that we can call to if we want to create a path, right? So let's see how it is being used here. We are trying to get the base directory of our application. So when you are creating your project, today you've created a folder called Django, how did we call it? Django lesson 1. That's the name of the folder. But tomorrow I can decide to change this folder or change the name of the folder. Or when I'm copying this to a new place, a new location, the path to this particular project may change. So we want to generate the path dynamically. We do not want to fix a path so that anytime the path changes, we would have to come and figure it out ourselves. So this is the way inside a setting, this line of code enables us to generate the base path or directory where this project is located, such that when we are working on other path or other projects or any other thing, we can use the relative path because we already have the base. Let's see where it's getting it from. So it's saying that path, we are passing __ file. This is telling us that this current file that we are in, which is settings.py, we want to resolve the path to this, but then we are interested in the parents of the parent. So this is like the parent of the parent. So let's try and figure that out. What's our base directory? Here, this is the current file. So this is what we have said. The current file, resolve the current file. The current file is what? Settings.py. Then we want the parent of that file. So which one is the parent of this file? That is news blog. That's the parent of the file. And we are interested in the parent of this one. So the parent of news blog is Django lesson 1. This means that essentially all we are saying is that our base directory is actually equal to Django lesson 1. This is what we are saying, that our base directory is equal to this. This is just for illustration purposes. Okay. So that's all we are saying, that our base directory is equal to this. So later, if you see somewhere that we have a file and that file is located in, say, static / then say styles.css. If you find in your application something like this, all that it means is that the actual location is this whole thing, because you are going to append the base directory to it. Does that make sense? So here we are just trying to generate our base directory. And it's as simple as the current file, the parent of the current file, and the parent of that. So if you bring, let me delete this before. If you bring that up, Control B, all you need to find is, okay, this is the current file. What's the parent of this one? That's news blog. What's the parent of this? Depending on how you created your project or you started your project, your parent's directory may be different. But just remember that this base directory, it's already done for you. You don't do anything about it. Okay. But I just want you to understand where it is coming from, so that if you have to make any changes here, you can come back to it and make that change. All right. Secret key. This is very important. And here, maybe I have to take a detour to explain some of these things. When you're building applications, there are times that you use some keys, some private keys, and these keys should not be exposed to anyone. See, security warning: keep the secret key used in production secret. Right now, this is in development and I'm teaching, so I have shown it publicly. But if you really want to deploy your application online, you have to make sure that this will not be here. It shouldn't be exposed. Like right now, even as it is in, it is not safe for your application. So we have to get rid of this from here and replace it with using, I think the best way you can go about this is to use an environment variable. So for those of you who do not know what environment variables are, when you have a computer, all right, the computer has this, say, memory where it keeps variables. Think of it that way. Memory where it keeps variables. So when you're building any application, you can throw those variables into that memory. So only someone who has access to the computer has those environment variables or has access to those variables. The variable itself will not, the value will not be shown here. It is just the name of the variable that will show here. The value is only available on your computer. So even if I send you the code base, you will not have access to the variables or the values to those variables. You only see that I used a variable name called this, but you won't have the value. So even if somebody is able to hack and download your code base, the person will not have access to your secret key. And there are a lot of these. Let me see if I can show you, except that these are ones that I'm using practically. So oh, I don't have a copy of it. No way. Hold on. Let me see if I can get a copy of it. GitHub. So one thing that's hold on. Let me. Oh no, I didn't create a copy of it. That's sad. Okay, so I was going to show you, but then maybe just in a flash. So we have a list of variables and their values. Okay, these are a list of variables, and all of these are important for the application to work. These are all values that are important for the application to work. What is the use of the secret key in production? Okay, so for Django in particular, this particular secret key, I'm here to figure out exactly what it is doing. Okay, but then there are a lot of other keys that you may come across. So in the example that I have here that I showed you earlier, let me see if I can get some of them. Okay, so let me just quickly create a test file. Call this keys.txt just for illustration purposes. So there is that, at least those ones I know what they are. So there is the port, and very soon we'll get to see the ports. Let's say something like that. Then there is, let me show you this, which is practical, more practical. Those of you who know Paystack, you will know what this is. Then there is also, say, this one. Let's use just these three. Okay, so this variable here, port, and when we start running applications, you would understand this. I'll explain the request response cycle, HTTP request response cycle, for you to appreciate why we need a port. But just know, if you need to set a port, you can easily do it here, and your project will pick it from here. There is also something like Paystack API secret key. So if you are connecting a payment gateway like Paystack, this is the authentication. So for those of you who are ALS, you would appreciate using, how does GitHub call that thing? Your personal access token. GitHub calls it personal access token. So those secret keys are the ones that you use to authenticate with the other platform. If I'm connecting to Paystack, remember that personally I have my password and my username or email that I used to log in. But now it is my application or project that is trying to connect to Paystack, not me. And my computer or the project that I'm working on cannot go and type password. So the one way that it can authenticate itself is by providing this secret key. This secret key is only available to the owner of the account. So I put it in my application, but in a way such that no one else has access to it. Because as soon as I get access to this key, I can also authenticate into your Paystack account. And that means I can cause harm to you. If there is money, I can redirect the money to my own account. In the same way, you are told not to share your personal access token for GitHub with anyone because a person can now access your GitHub account. So that is how all of these things are going to work. And practically, for major projects, you're going to have a lot of these. Let me give you a perfect example. OpenAI's API. So we're working on a project. There were 3 of us working on a project, and I mistakenly pushed my code to GitHub without creating a .getignore file to ignore the. No, I think I created it. Yes, we're using Nest.js. Nest.js has this weird way. Their .getignore file comes by default, but then it rather checks for .env.local. And what we had created was .env. So there is no .local. So we didn't even realize that Nest.js didn't exclude our private file, the .env file. So we pushed the code to GitHub, not knowing that our OpenAI API key was exposed. Then after a while, we tried accessing the platform that we're working on, and it was not working. Something was failing. Well, this thing was working just a couple of minutes ago. So I went and I saw that OpenAI has revoked my key. It's like, well, what happened? Is it that someone else tried to access it or what? Then I deleted it, created a new key. The same thing happened again. It happened to us like 3 different times. Before I realized what was going on, then initially I didn't even figure out that it was because we've pushed to GitHub, because I didn't know we had pushed to GitHub. So what I did was to generate, there are 3 of us who were working on the project. So I generated 3 separate API keys because I felt that maybe because they are all using the same API key, OpenAI is thinking that this has been exposed to other people. So that's why they are revoking it. Then I went ahead to create individually for them. Then when I created it and worked on mine was revoked. Like, I've not shared this with anyone. So how come this is revoked? So it was through that I realized, oh, I've pushed it to GitHub. So OpenAI was able to detect that my code is on GitHub. I don't know how, don't ask me. But then they probably have put, I think it's now common because it's not just OpenAI. I've had another experience like that when the code, your API is, even GitHub itself has those mechanisms to check and see, oh, you've exposed your keys, and they will alert you. So that's what happened. And please take it from me. If you are working on secret keys, which you are going to be working on if you happen to do any big project, make sure that you don't push that to no, sorry. You don't push that to GitHub. Not at all. Always make sure you are ignoring those ones. But we are going to learn in Python, how do we even create these things? So there is a concept of environment variables, which we should know of. Environment variables. And remember, this is applicable in almost every programming language you are. Hey, how did I write environmental? Oh my God. Yeah, environment. This concept is applicable to any programming language at all. You just have to find out in this particular programming language, how do I create the environment variables? That is all that you need to find out. Someone is asking on YouTube whether this is live. Unfortunately, it's live, but then, yeah, so those of you who are watching on YouTube, it's live, but we are in a Zoom session. So let me just do one thing here right now, guys. Pardon me to just drop a link to the Zoom session on YouTube so that those of you on YouTube, you can, yeah, I hope YouTube allows me. So those of you on YouTube, I've dropped the link in the chat. if you are interested, you can join us on Zoom. Okay. Erasmus. Kobe says, I had an experience with GitHub when my GPD key got exposed and they alerted me. Oh, okay. Yeah. I think it's really a good feature in there because sometimes you just do not know, especially when you thought you had ignored that file, but it turns out you didn't ignore it. Okay, so let's talk about the environment variables. Environment variables are very key if you need to hide anything. I've already explained it that your computer has a memory that is reserved for these variables. As soon as you put it there, anywhere on your computer, you can have access to them. So it's very easy. That's how it knows it keeps access to your name. So almost anywhere at all, we can get your name, the user accounts, the computer's name, like all of those information are available in the environment variables. And we can add our own variables to those environment variables when we are working. And there are various packages that allow us to do that. So in Python, there is a package known as, I want to believe there are other packages, but this is what I have used before. .env, python-env. And the reason why I'm stuck with this is because in JavaScript or in Node, I use the .env. So in Node, we also have .env. So I use this package in Node a lot. So when I got to Python and I found out that, oh, there is python.env, it's like they are brothers from the same mother. So that's where I resonated with that and use it. So the first thing you want to do, whether you are doing Node or Python, will be to install that particular package that allows you to create the environment variables. And after installing it, you now create a separate directory called dots. Please, it's important. .env. The dots is important. And if you have done any bit of, what will I say, Linux, Bash, like all of those things, by now you'd have realized the importance of the dot. So this makes it a hidden file, right? So you have to make sure that you have the .env. Some files call it anything, .env, .prod, to indicate that, hey, my handwriting, pardon me for that, to indicate that this environment variables is for production. Some others do .env.dev to indicate that they are in the development environment, or some even do .env.local, but I have already stuck with just .env. Don't confuse me. Okay, so .env. The first thing I said was to install our package. Then the next thing is to create this file. And within this file, all we need to do is to write the name of the variable. Then we assign it to a value. So name will be here and value will be here. No quotation marks. Just the name is equal to the value. No spaces. Name is equal to value together. So let's create one for this our project. Where is our project? Ooh. Okay, sure. So this is our project. You want to create it in the parents directory. That's what we call the base directory. All right. So let it be within here. So we can go ahead and create our .env. Then you remember in our settings, what brought us here was our secret key. So we can copy this and say, mostly one common practice is depending on the application that you're working on, you can say, like for this, we are working on Django, so we can say Django underscore secret key, just to represent that, okay, this is coming from my Django. All right. If you paid attention to what I was working, what I showed you earlier, I had paystack underscore something, cloudinary underscore something. So you know exactly where or what this secret key is for. So this secret key is for your Django app. Then you go ahead and pass the value. Here, the value was put in quotations marks, right? But I've told you that when you are declaring it using the environment variable, you don't have to do that. So we just put it directly here and we can save this. Once we have cut it, okay, so now we can delete this part. But before we do that, I want to show you how to get here. So the first thing, oh, we haven't done the first thing. The first thing was for us to install the package. Make sure that your virtual environment is activated. This shows that it is activated. Then we can go ahead and do pip install python dot env. Okay. Remember once more that these things are applicable in other programming languages. So learn the concept. If you forget even the commands and you remember the concept that, oh, to keep things private, I need to create an environment variable. And this is how you do it. I don't even remember the package name. Just go online and find out for this programming language, packages that I can use to create environment variables and how to use those ones. And it will be as simple as that. So yes, we've done step 1 and step 2, which is installing that package and creating the .env file and putting a variable in there. So the name of the variable is equal to, oh, what did I do? Wait, there's an equal to in this as well. That's interesting. Okay, so for now, let me, I'll have to confirm because in JavaScript, we don't add the quotation marks. So for now, let's just add the quotation marks. Then, because color coding here is giving me a problem. Okay, so that's fine. Maybe there's a subtle difference between JavaScript and Python that I wasn't aware of. All right, now that we have done this, it doesn't mean the variable is available for use. We have just put a variable inside a file. We have not exposed it to the computer. We've not sent it to the computer. So we would want to do that anytime our application is about to run. Anytime our application is about to run, we want to send these variables into our environment variable. Remember, this is just a file. Even though we call it .env, it is just a file. And it is called this way so that the package that we are using knows exactly where to go and grab these things to send to the environment variables. So how do we ensure that anytime we're about to use our application, these environment variables are set? The one way to go about it is for every file that you are going to use it in there, you have to call the function that is going to expose this as the environment variable. But you would realize that that will not be an effective way because every file that you're going to use a variable, you have to call it. It doesn't make sense. One file that we all know by now is the manage.py. And we know that manage.py is able to, it's always going to run, right? Manage.py is always going to run when we are about to run a project. For instance, you want to run the server, you are going to run manage.py. So we can come and put it here within the manage.py so that anytime, any day, when we are about to start our project, it is going to expose this to the environment variables. That is, it will help us create the variables in the environment path to make it accessible to us. Does that make sense? So we want to come and work within the manage.py file. As soon as the manage.py file runs, just as it was doing for the settings model, if you remember the explanation I gave you for settings, as soon as the manage.py is run, it sets all the variables within settings and puts them into the environment variable Django underscore settings underscore model. So the best way for us to, or the best place for us to utilize this file that we have is to put it in the manage.py. Please, I could have just gone ahead and show you, oh, do this, but I like to explain why all of these things are happening so that even if you forget the step, by trying to recall why you are doing what, it's easy for you to remember. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is to import the package that is going to help us get the environment variables. Okay, so we do import.env. And yes, when we're installing the package is called python-env. But to use it, you call it as .env. So we just go ahead and import env. .env. But here the dot is not dot, but the spelling of dot. I hope you understand that. So we import .env and we use .env to load this particular file. What did we do? We are importing .env, and the next thing is to use that package that we are importing. Let's use this to now load or read the variables here. I know there are a lot of steps, and this is not directly relevant to building your Django application, but then these are relevant when you're building any application. So I do not want us to skip it. That's why I'm spending a lot of time trying to explain all of these bases. And these are things that are applicable in building other projects. So as a developer, as an engineer, it's something you need to know. Okay, so let's go on. Let's assume that we want to pull it here. What we are going to do, we have already brought .env. So just as it's done here, we can also do .env. Then what are we trying to do? We are trying to read the environment variable. So all that we need to do is to call, there's a method called read underscore .env. Giving me suggestions. Okay, so just by running this, this is going to load because it knows what kind of file to look for. It knows what kind of file to look for. I don't know why it's not giving me the suggestions. Load env. I hope I spelled it right. Oh, I said read. Okay. Oh, goodness. Yeah. So if you are very comfortable about using like exploring things, okay, it's easy for you to pick them up. Like this, you can easily go into this package in VS Code. You can hold the control key and click on it. So I was just trying to figure out what's in here, and you realize that the options that it gave here, we have load.env values, get key, set key, unset key, find.env, and this. So I'm looking for the load. So we call load.env. Just by doing this, now what it means is that anytime we run manage.py, our program is going to have all the variables that we store here loaded into the environment variables. And now we can easily use that in our application. Remember that for this particular application, where we need that secret key is within our settings.py. So now we can get rid of this and call that variable name. The variable name here is called Django secret key, but it is coming in from the environment variables. And to be able to access the environment variables, we need to import. So let's import OS. Import OS. Then we are going to load from the OS model. If you remember here, there were certain environment variables, the default environment variables, and it used what? os.environ. So that means that one of the things that we need to do, and this is just you can make an inference to set, we are using os.environ.set default to set the default one. So if now I want to get it, I want to get what has already been set, then I can go ahead and use os.environ.get. Then what do we want to get? We want to get this particular variable. Hey, JavaScript will not kill me. I was just about to put the column there. Okay. Was it even column? The semicolon. Yeah. So what is happening here right now is that the secret key. So when I push my code, this is what you are going to see in my code on GitHub. The secret key is equal to os.environ.get and this value. But where is this coming from? The value to this is actually available in my computer's memory if I have run manage.py. Because as soon as I run manage.py, it's going to run this before it does any other thing. It runs this. And by running this, it is exposing any variables I've set here into the memory of my computer so that I can now have access to it globally. I hope that makes sense. Guys, are you following? How is it going? Is there any confusion anywhere? Any questions? Yes, yes. Oh, sorry, guys. So I thought the chat was open and I wasn't seeing it. Okay, so let me read. I didn't mean to ask, but do we have same in client side JavaScript? What Erasmus, sorry, what were you referring to? In client
The
side
the dot env.
the .env. Yes, yes, yes. So but the problem with using the client side is that those ones can also be easily accessible. That is, I mean, if you are not pushing it, that's fine. Yes, so you can use it. Some of the applications like React and Nest, they have a way that you are supposed to call it if you want to use it in your client side, because they are mostly available to the server, right? They are on the server, right? But for, yes, I think for React.js and Node.js, there is a way, no, and Nest.js, there is a way around it for them. If you call your variable, the name starts from React underscore app underscore the name. I think that it will pick it for the client side. Yeah, so that's also possible. Chema says, is it the same as creating .get ignore to hide the VMV files? Yes, exactly. So your .get ignore, you use it to hide any file at all that you wish, not to push to your GitHub. So that is very important for you not to push it. Oh, it says yeah in Django quotes and is added. Okay, thank you for sharing. I didn't know. I mean, thank you. Musuru, what were you saying? I should come again on. Sorry, I totally lost it. Forgot to check the chat. So if you can unmute and tell me what you wanted me to elaborate on, I'll be happy to. George says, how do we install the package? Okay. Yes. So pip install, then the name of the package. Great. Django also has its own .env package. Oh, really? I didn't know about that. Django.env. That's interesting. Okay. I'll look at that. Oh, I can use semicolons. I don't lie, serious. Since when? And you missed the OS import. I don't really. No, I just want to be serious. Like, are you serious about using semicolons in Python? Or you are just pulling my legs? Import OS. Okay. So this is what we did. Let me write them down to summarize what we've done. We said that you need one, oh no, you need an environment variable, right? We need to create environment variables. So how to use environment variables in Python, or in this our case, we are talking about Django. First, install the package for that, then create your .env file, then you need to load it. So load the .env file. But how do you load it? We are going to load it using the package, right? And I said that this should be done every time your application restarts. So in Django, the best place to load it is to put it inside the manage.py, because that file will be run every time you are running your package. That's what you are going to use to run every time you are running your project. That's what you are going to use to run it. So that's where we're going to put it. And in there, to use it, you need to import the .env, right? Import .env. So say load this, in. All right, then we import this. And after we've imported .env, we go ahead and use .env, then dot load. It was load, right? Load. Oh, I've even forgotten again. Load.env, yes. So load.env. This is what auto suggestions do to you. If I was typing it, it would be suggesting it for me. Anyway, so now after you've done this, it means that your environment variables are now accessible. They are on your computer. So anywhere at all in your project, you can access them. And remember that for secret key itself, we only needed it in settings. We can set several other variables and we may need them elsewhere. But for secret key, we need our secret key in settings. So how then do we get the environment variable that we have created in there? First of all, we are going to use the OS model. So import OS. And how do we access it? We are using the environment variable. So os.environ, then .get, we are getting the variable. Which variable are you trying to get? So put the name of the variable. And it's common practice to use caps, all caps, for the name of your variable. So whatever variable that you named it, all caps, like that. So by doing this, you have gotten the value that you have stored in your environment variable. Anybody gets your code, they don't have access to that value. So they can't use that service. Assuming this application is supposed to use OpenAI's API, we are only going to call it with this way. So anybody who has access to our code base does not have access to our API key. Okay. Does that make sense? I think we spent a lot of time on this. The last bit is also very important for us to appreciate everything you are going to be doing in Django. So let me stay on that. I hope I've answered all the questions. Okay. My network is starting up. Oh, okay. Sorry, Adeole. Please sorry to draw you back. Which key is the control break in laptop used for quitting the Django server? Oh, okay. Control C. Yeah. Thank you for adding. Yeah, so let's move on to the next phase of this thing. Guys, I hope you are all following. This other phase too is very important and it's applicable to almost any web app that you are going to build. So let's pay attention to it. This is not Django specific, but once again, it's something that we need to really appreciate in order for us to understand what we are learning in Django. And as I keep saying, this is not the kind of lessons you find if you are watching any tutorial. In fact, if I was supposed to record a Django tutorial and put it on YouTube, these are not things I'm going to be talking about, because everyone who is coming there is looking for Django, Django, Django. But I see that it's important for us to understand certain things to make it easy for us to now learn all of these. And when you are learning, I prefer you learn, you obtain solid knowledge that is transferable to any other thing that you are learning than just, oh, I learned this framework, so that's the only thing I know. You can, with this knowledge, you can now begin to pick any other framework that you want. Say after you've learned Django, you should be able to easily pick up Laravel. Like, okay, so let me stop talking. Let's get into it. We need to understand or appreciate what we call the HTTP request response cycle. How many of you here have done the what happens when you type that project? What happens when you type google.com? There's a project like that in ALS. How many of you have done it? Or who did it
Dog, I think
recently?
it's the web infrastructure design.
Oh, okay.
And then also, I think you have a typo with the HTTP thing.
Oh, interesting. HTTP. HTTP. Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah. So that particular project, you would have done something in relation to this, which is very important. If you are yet to do it or you haven't ever thought about it, the question here is, when you enter something into your browser, not just a search engine, into your browser, or a URL into the address bar of your browser, what actually goes on behind the scene? There's a lot of things that go on. The first part is what you can call as DNS resolution. That's the first part. So we can, yeah, talk about two main things. The first one is the DNS resolution, and the second one is the HTTP response request response cycle. Those are the two main things. I will not be talking about the DNS resolution. So if you don't know about it, that would be your assignment. Go and read on that. Let's focus on the HTTP request response cycle and link that to Django. So for you to be able to access anything on the internet, any resource at all on the internet, you need what you call a URL, right? I think we should start talking about these things so that those of you who do not know will appreciate it. What does URL stand for? Somebody should drop it in the chat. And what does HTTP stand for? I think it helps to appreciate everything that is going on. This RRC I've written is just request response cycle. There's the chat. Let me grab chats. Where are you? All right. Uniform resource locator. So what I want you to pay attention to is the resource locator. Okay, great. Thank you all so much. Then we have the hypertext transfer protocol. Great. So pay attention. We are locating a resource. There is a resource somewhere that we are going to locate. Where is it? It's somewhere on a server. A server is essentially just a computer that has been configured to serve resources. So the URL is going to enable us to locate that resource on the server. But the protocol by which it travels, the protocol by which this URL will locate that server and communicate with it, how it's able to communicate with the server, is the HTTP. You all understand protocol. You can't just walk to the president of your country and talk to the president anytime, any day that you want. There's a protocol to that. There is a way in which it should be done. So you need maybe to send your request to someone. That person will communicate to this other person, and this other person will now pass it on to the president. That is the protocol for any individual in the country who wants to communicate to the president. So the URL wants to communicate with your server or a client, you, whoever, you are sitting behind your browser, you are trying to communicate to a server, a computer somewhere else. But there is an established protocol through which this connection or communication is going to take place. And that is known as the hypertext transfer protocol. This protocol is such that it works in a cycle, and we call that the request response cycle. So the client, in our case, the browser, will send a request to the server, and the server will respond with a response. I hope it makes sense. These things are practical. Like, think about them. There is protocol to everything. You can't just walk out to somebody and communicate to the person. To communicate, there is a protocol you need to follow. So your browser cannot just go to the server and just grab what it wants. There is a protocol it needs to follow. And that protocol is the HTTP. That's if you are using the web to access something. In fact, we also have HTTPS. We'll talk about them. But really appreciate this so that we can move on. I hope you are getting it. All right. Thanks for this. I left my studying for a test for this class and it's serving me already. Wow, I see. Thanks for joining in. I'm glad that you are enjoying the session. All right. King David on YouTube. Yes, the session is available on YouTube. So as soon as we are done, you still have access to it. Right, it's always going to be there. Okay, so let's continue. HTTP requests. So now we have our browser here. You entered something into your search engine. This browser is trying to reach the server, right? But then it's going through, what it is sending is the HTTP request. And finally, the server will respond to, thank you, Praise. So Praise on YouTube, thank you. Yeah, the browser will, the server, so this is the server. Let me name them. This is the browser. Okay, we call the browser clients. So you would sometimes hear about the client server model. The server will respond with what you will call an HTTP response. After we are done with this session, I bet that the Django concept should be easy for us. Without a good understanding of this, it will be somehow confusing. That's why I'm taking my time to go through this. So we have, let me try redrawing them again. We have the client. Now you should understand when I say client, I mean the browser that you are using or the mobile app or computer you are using to access whatever URL that you are trying to access. Then the server is where all the resources are located. All the files that website has, they are all here. The client sends a request. We call that request an HTTP request. Then the server will do all the processing. After the processing is done, it sends a response back to the client. Make sense? Then now, this can be back and forth. That's why we call it a cycle. It can be back and forth. This sends, it receives. If I need more, I request more. If I need more, I need clarification. This is a communication, remember, and the protocol has already been established. So Once there is that link between them, the communication can go on for as long as possible until you say you are done, the client is done, they leave. Okay. So this is like the basic parts. But now let's zoom into the server and see what is actually happening. Within this server, a lot of things are going on. Remember, we are zooming into the server. Okay. Pardon me, let me push the chart away. Okay, we are zooming into the server. Within that server, there's a lot of things happening. One of such is that there is what we call the web server. The web server. An example of web server that you might have come across is Apache. So if you ever hear why you need to install an Apache, then it is a web server. So Apache is the one that listens for the request, the HTTP request. So Apache is the ear of your server. It is listening to whatever is going on. Has there been a request? Okay. Now when it gets the request, it sends, if it's able to process the request, it's going to process it. If it is not able to and it demands something from someone, it's going to get it and make sure that request has been processed. And once that is done, it will now send the response back to the client. So that is what the web server is doing inside your server. Remember, the server itself is a computer. Okay, but within the server, we have this software acting as a web server. That is the one that is specifically listening to the communication on HTTP using that protocol. You see? So this is like, oh, the president is within the, how do they call that? Those places. In Ghana, we call it Jubilee House. Nigerians, I think yours is called, is it, what do you call it? Osu or something? Like, I forgot it. And Americans call it, yes, White House. Like that.
Aso Rock, Aso Rock.
Aso Rock. Okay. Yeah, Aso Rock. Yeah. Anyway, so, you know, the president is in there, but then to talk to the president, there is a route to that. So say if the army guys are coming to talk to the president, there is someone they have to go through to get to the president. But if a civilian is trying to get to the president, there is also a different person they have to go through it. So now we are looking at HTTP. We are looking at that particular protocol. We are looking at when you are accessing things via the internet. We can start talking about different protocols. We have the FTP, talking about files, uploads. That's a different protocol. And something else handles that. We can talk about the mail protocol for emails. Something else handles it. But now our interest is in using the internet to access files. Not files particular, but any resource at all that we want on the internet. Using HTTP as a protocol. So we have a web server that is listening and responding. That's the correspondence, the web server. So the web server, if we are using a web framework like Django, the web server itself doesn't handle the request. As soon as the request comes to it, it looks at that request and sees if it is something it's able to handle. Most web servers like Apache or Nginx, which are the popular ones that you are likely to use, most of these ones, what they can do, they can serve static files, and we will later look at it, okay? But there are certain things that they cannot do. So if they can't do, they have to send that request to the relevant part of your application. So this will now send a request to your web framework. In our case, we are using Django. So it will send it to the web framework. But the web framework needs to have an HTTP server that it interacts with between the web server and the web framework. See, the web framework is here. And remember that this is talking through still the web server's protocol it uses is the HTTP protocol. So if it wants to even interact with the web framework, there has to be an HTTP server somewhere here. Okay, there has to be a server, an HTTP server here. And that is something that personally, when I started learning about Django, it was confusing me until I started to compare how Express.js works and how Django works before I could appreciate this. So please pay attention. Your web server, if it can't perform certain processes, so if as soon as it realizes I can't perform that process, it has to pass it on to your web framework. But then you know the protocol. There is a protocol, HTTP protocol. So it needs to communicate to an HTTP server. And that server is the one that is listening for the framework. Then it would now cause the framework to take an action. Does this make sense so far? Coming from the browser sends the request to the web server. The web server checks if it can respond to it. It responds directly to it and sends it back. If not, then it sends it to the HTTP server. So if you have a static website, mostly it is just the web server that will do everything because it's able to serve the static pages. But if you have a web framework that is working in there, then it would have to send a request to the web framework, especially if it's a request it can't serve. But it needs an HTTP server to be able to communicate with this, the web framework. The same way, so if it is not Django and it is Express.js, it's still the same way. There's going to be an HTTP server that works like that. In some programming languages, this server can be available within these ones, the web server itself. The HTTP server can be added as a model within these ones. So you wouldn't see the separation here. But in Python, it's not like that. So let's stick to what Python is telling us right now. It's not like that. So it happens such that Python had several web applications, web frameworks, sorry. Python has several web frameworks and they all have these different way to communicate with HTTP. So it was becoming tedious because you configure one way right now, but then this way is able to communicate with this particular, say, engine X, but it's not able to communicate with Apache. So if today you did your project using engine X, the next time you want to use Apache, it doesn't work. So they decided to standardize the way the web servers will interact with Python frameworks so that every Python framework should probably stick to that one, so that almost every web server that you are using can now be able to interact directly with your web framework without changing anything. So that led us to what we call the WSGI, which is the Web Server Gateway Interface. So this is just an interface that enables web servers to communicate directly with your Python frameworks. It's also more of a protocol, okay? That standardized protocol in terms of how does your web server communicate with your web framework. All right. So an example of the server, the HTTP server, or what you can call WSGI server that you come across, especially those of you in ALS. I wish Adewale could unmute. I think it's called Guineacon or something. Yeah. So that's one popular one that you're likely to come across. Django, come again. Sorry. I think there's a project in ALS where we dealt with something like this. That particular project was the project that I didn't do. I remember I called Adewale to explain it to me. Yeah. So what was I saying? Yes. So this is just one of those servers that enables the web server itself to now interact with your web framework. Are we okay up to this point? We are dealing with a lot of things and I need us to understand so we can move on. We started with the browser. The browser goes to the web server. So this is browser. This is web server. Now the web server in Python has to go to the WSGI server. Then this is in our web framework. But remember, all this while, what have we sent? It's just a URL that we have sent. A URL that is looking for a particular resource, right? It's looking for a particular resource. So when it comes to the web framework itself, so now we are zooming into the web framework itself. I know today there is a lot of theory, but please, and if you are getting confused anytime here, when we finish, the recording is available on YouTube. Go rewatch it, try and understand all of that before our next session. So now we are zooming into our web framework. When you come within the web framework itself, remember that all that we have brought in is just a URL. It's a path, a link, a URL. Understand it from that end. We also call it a route. It's a route, okay? And it can be any route at all. So the very first thing we need is something to handle our routes and say, okay, this particular route, it's for this other thing. This is for this. This is for that. So in almost every programming language, you come across the concept of route handlers. So they are like the entry point of the web framework itself. Apart from the server, after the server has been established, the next thing is the route handlers. They will now split that, okay, you are looking for this specific resource, go this way. Remember that Django itself is what? Using the architecture MVT, the MVT architecture. So even before you access, even though they write it as MVT, if you paid attention the last time, you usually start with the view, right? And the view can communicate directly to, it can send you to the templates, or it will communicate back and forth with the model to get some information. But how do I get to this specific view? Say somebody is looking for a resource. The resource is our news blog is looking for, this person wants to sign up to our newsletter. So say newsblog.com/newsletter. The URL is what is coming here, newsblog.com/newsletter. /newsletter is being passed to our web framework. The route handler will now look for, okay, this is newsletter. Newsletter is associated with the newsletter view. So let me route it to the newsletter view before it does any other thing. So that's the first thing I want you to understand. When we get away from the service and we come to the web framework, we start with the route handlers. In Python or in Django in particular, we don't call them route handlers. Django calls them URL. So it's very simple. A URL came, you know, when we enter Django, we are looking for URL. That's where it's starting when we have gone past our server. As soon as you come past the server, you come to the coding part itself, it starts from the URL. But the URL is essentially routing, it's handling the routes, guys. Time is not on the side. I need to start running for the event. Yes, so the URL is handling our route. And now this URL that this person was looking for, newsletter, would now go and look for the view called newsletter view. And that view may interact with the newsletter model and pick some information from that model and now eventually present the output in the templates. That's in the HTML form. And finally, we get, or sometimes it can even decide not to present it in the template. It depends on how you implement it, and send back this response to our web server. Then the web server will send it back to the client. Does that make sense? I know that there's a lot of things. Let me read comments. Okay. Says, I was in class today. We were doing React, but I was only thinking of code it. I'm glad I made it. Wow, wow. Happy to hear. Thank you, Erasmus, for coming anyway. Yeah, this is 3-in-1 package session. Interesting. The Express since the lesson is all encompassing. I'm glad you guys are loving it. Or UVCon. Oh, okay. So there is GuineaCon and UVCon. Interesting. We use GuineaCon when we're deploying Airbnb clone project. Yes, yes, yes. So that's a project that I think I didn't do. Yeah, but great. I hope now you understand all of that. So now I'm tempted to go back and do that project, and hopefully I'll be able to score that project fully back to Django. It uses your in place of router. Yes, it does. Exactly. Great. It makes a lot of sense. In fact, I appreciate focusing on fundamentals before coding. Great. So I'm glad that you all are learning and you're not feeling that I'm wasting your time. Because if you're watching just a YouTube video, you probably find out that this is a waste of time. You want to build applications. Why are you wasting our time doing all of this? But I'm glad you all appreciate it. So in summary, we said that you have a browser. Let's just draw them. We have a browser, you enter a URL on your browser, right? What does it do? It goes to the server. Within the server, there is what we call the web server. The web server checks, so it receives a request, right? The HTTP request is sent. If the server is able to process that request, it will directly send back feedback to your browser in the form of HTTP response. If the server is not able to, especially if it is not a static file, it will now try to contact your web server, your web framework, sorry. But your web framework needs an HTTP server. And in the case of Python, it is interface with what we call the web server gateway interface. Recently, there is a more advanced one for asynchronous communication between them. So you'd also have either WSGI or we have ASGI, where A just represents asynchronous server gateway interface. Okay, so if you saw it before we got to settings.py, I said let's skip that and we went straight to here. Then this will go back to our web framework. But when we get to our web framework, the first thing is our route handlers. In Python, it is called a URL. Then the URL will route it to the specific view that we want. This view is able to interact with the model back and forth to the model to get whatever it wants, and finally present something in the template if that is what they are looking for, and send it back to this interface or that particular server, depending on which one is returning. Then this will now send it back to the web server. Then the web server will send a response to the browser. Please go and sit down. Your assignment is to go and write the process, how this works. If you write it out and you understand this thing, it's going to be way easy for you to understand how Django works. So that is your assignment. Now let me go back to the code base, do a quick explanation of the rest. Debug mode is set to true. When you are in development, you have to make sure that debug is set to true so that it gives you errors. When we go to production, if we are releasing this project, then we have to set it to false. As simple as that. Allowed host. When we are in production, you want to enter the IP address of your server or domain name of your server so that only that server will be able to have access to this project, or any specific servers that you want to be able to have access to this project. You can add their IP address or their domain names. Installed apps. I've already explained the concept of apps. Apps are more like components or models of your Django application. So Django by default comes with some apps. We have the admin app, we have the auth app, content types, sessions, messages, static files, and we are going to start using some of these soon. Admin will enable us to do the backend admin stuff. Okay, creating content, adding users, and all of that, managing people. That will be this particular app. So everything that has to do with admin will be under the admin app. Everything that has to do with authorization of users will be handled by this app. Everything that has to do with the types of content, say, I think we will explore it. So let me know where messages, flashing messages, and static files like images and the rest, CSS, JavaScript, HTML, those are static files. That will be handled specifically by these apps. So anytime, remember I said in Django, a lot of things are configurable. And when you do something, you have to come and tell another thing that, oh, I just did this. So anytime you create an app, you have to come and register the app here. If your app is not part of the installed apps in the settings, it will not show up anywhere. So even though you have written the URLs for the app, you've written the view, the template, whatever models, you've done all of that. For as long as you have not registered it in this list, it is not considered an installed app. That app is not part of your project. So when you create your app, you have to come here and install it here by adding just the name of the app, or I'll show you exactly how to do it. Middleware. So that's complicates the things a bit. Here in the request response cycle, from where it is starting from, when it's getting into our web framework. Remember, when it's getting into our web framework, we have the route handlers, right? The route handlers, right after this point to anytime till it gets back, we can plant some specific functions to play certain rules. And those ones are known as middleware. So the middleware is that function that you can put in between your request response cycle. At any point within your request response. I don't know why I like the request more. I like the response more. Your request response cycle. Anywhere in between them, you can put a function to perform any function, any role that you want. I can show you an example from the code that I showed you for the e-commerce project that I showed you. So I have a middleware that checks for the authorization of the user. That is this person having the right token to access what they are looking to access. So anytime the route is about to take place, that's the first thing I check. Does this user have the authority to access this particular route or this particular view that you want the user to see? So that's a middleware. So just remember, a middleware, when we have our requests and our response, anywhere between these, we can plant functions, specific functions that play certain roles. We'll explore them later, and those are called middlewares. So if you look at this, it comes with some middlewares already installed: security middleware, session middleware, common middleware, and all of this. The next thing is root URL configuration. Remember, I said the route handlers in Django is called the URL. So this is telling us exactly where the main URL file can be found. That's newsblog.urls. Let's look at this. This is this file, newsblog, then URLs. So this is the file, and we are going to explore this maybe in the next session and how to add this and what does it mean. Okay, just remember that. Then templates. So these are some configurations regarding a template. In Django, we are able to create templates and we will explore them later. But then to be able to use templates are like, okay, you're writing some HTML, but you're able to put some things that are not HTML in there. So there has to be a system or an engine that is able to now understand this and compile it back to the actual HTML that is supposed to be. So in the settings part for the template, you have to set which engine you are using. So currently we are using the Django. By default, we use the Django template engine. That's what it's saying here. We can change this engine to something else. So those of you who have learned Flask before, we have Ginger 2 as the template engine or templating engine used in Flask. But in Django, Django comes with its own templating engine. And that's what is mentioned here. The directories for our template. So this, anytime we create a template directory somewhere else, we'd have to come and indicate. So we have to indicate where our template directory is. We'll put it in here. And app directories to be true. I've forgotten exactly what this is supposed to be doing, but I'll tell you later. So these are other options that we can set for our template. We can set some context processes. These are like global variables that we need our templates to know about. Okay, so we can set those ones, and these are default ones that comes with Django. Okay, so we have context for the authorization. That is, these users, their username, their password, and all of those will be provided in the template because we have set these context providers here. So we can also create our own context providers. For instance, we want to pass messages when something happens. Let's say after you have successfully created something, we want to pass a message, flash a message to you, successfully created. We can use this context provider to do that. All right. Then we talked about WSGI already, and it's telling us that this can be found in newsblog.wsgi.application. So when you come to, the files, we have the WSGI, then this is the application that we are calling. So you can delve into it to see exactly what it's doing, but I've explained it to you. It's just an interface. Even here, they are trying to explain the public interface to Django's whatever. So it's just an interface that enables your web framework to now be communicating with the web server itself. And the other colleague of it is the ASGI, which is the asynchronous version of this. So for those of you who want to build real-time communication applications like chats, applications, and the like, you would rather be using the ASGI. But this is in production. When we are doing development, we don't need it. It's in production. Okay, then we can also set our database. So by default, we use SQLite, and we can use any other like MySQL, PostgreSQL, and the rest. Okay, if you want, you can explore all of these and you see the various types of databases that it supports. But the other thing is, do you remember base underscore del? It was one of the variables up here that we met over here, as you can see, and it is where it's telling us where our base directory is, right? So here, all that we are saying is that the base directory, within that, we are creating a database file called db.sqlite. So if you pay attention, you see this file here, db.sqlite3. So this is where it came from. You can decide to change the name of your database here. Auth password validators. So Django has also provided ways to validate your password when you are creating passwords. So you want to, this will automatically, unless you take any of them out, they have been configured there, and you can also go and change it. So for instance, we have the minimum length validator. So this is checking for the minimum length of a password. By default, it's set to 8 characters. So if you don't want, or you want it to be more than 8, then you have to go in there and edit it. Let's say hold Control key and click on this. You're able to find the function here. And in here, see, the minimum length is set to 8 by default. So you can come in here and say that, no, I want my minimum length to be 18. This is why you need to understand the underworkings of all of these. If you don't want somebody to use a common password, this is like, there are about 2,000 passwords that are very common. See, 20,000 actually common passwords. So it will check the password the person is entering against them and tell you whether this is weak or strong, and let the person not use it. Do you want to prevent somebody from using numeric passwords? So these are validators that Django has created that it checks all your password against. If you want, you can also create your own validators and add them so that Django will use it to check against all your passwords that you create in the app. Language code, here it's English US by default. I don't know if it's the same for every one of you, but in my local, I think it makes sense. What you can do is, this is the language and this is the local. So this is English for US. If let's say we want French for France, we can do something like this. Okay, so the English for UK, you can also change it like that. And time zone, you can change the time zone. The time zone is the default time zone is going to start using to store the various date and time that you work with. Okay, so if I change this to whatever time zone, then that is going to change. Then use I18N. I18N. Those of you who are doing back-end specialization in ALS, you might have come across it. That is internationalization. Yeah, so that is here. And interestingly, it was only, I think, yesterday that I got to know what this 18 is. I've always seen it. I know what it is, but I've never bothered to understand what this 18 is. It turns out it's just 18 characters between I and N. When you count from from N here to O here, it's 18 characters. So they are saying I18N. That's all, internationalization. If you set it to true, if somebody is using your application, even though your time zone is set to UTC, it's going to automatically calculate it into the person's time zone, right? No, sorry. So that will be the time zone. This is for the language. So it's going to use the person's context, their location specific, especially if you want to configure your application to be translated in multiple languages. That's what you're going to do. I think I'm being called for the event and I need to go. This is one that we are going to be playing with shortly when we start. And this tells us that if we don't state an ID type, a primary key for our models, it should use this type, the big autofill, and we'll understand that later. I hope, even though I've tried to speed up in the last part, I hope you now appreciate what this setting file is, where we need to configure what, and so that when we start writing the code, it becomes easier. I'll open the floor for 3 minutes to pick questions. 3 minutes if you have any questions. Yes. Any questions? If you have any questions, please go ahead and ask them. 3 minutes. Otherwise, we are done for today. I wanted us to create our own first app. So remember that for apps, we break earlier on. I think I showed you some apps that we can have in a news site, right? We talked about news blog, articles, comments, newsletters. So let's assume that we are creating the newsletter app. This is what we are going to do. Here we are. Virtual environment is installed or activated already. And you remember that we are going to use manage.py. Then if you don't remember these commands, see, you can always run your Django admin and get the list of commands. And one command is here, start app. So that is what we use to start app. If you want to start a project, a start project. From the beginning, I explained the difference between project and app so that you will appreciate this. Start project, start app. Okay, so let me go ahead and do this. So that will become part of your assignment for you to run this command. That is Python manage.py start app. Then the name of the app. So for us, we are creating the comments app. We run that and it's going to create a new folder. You see up here, we have the folder called comments. That is a new app. So for each app, it's going to give you a new folder. And when you open in, we have migration. So the next time we meet, we'll talk about what migrations are. We already know what this magic or Danda method is for, or file is. Admin, we'll talk about it. Apps, this is more of a configuration for the app. So you come in here and you find a configuration for that app. Models.py, this is where we'll write all the models for this particular app. Test, those of you who have done test-driven development, you know the essence of writing tests to make sure that your code or your project always work as it's supposed to work. Then our views, where we'll be creating the views function. So this is how the app works. Any questions? Otherwise, I think stop sharing my screen. Oh, you're welcome. And I'm very late for the event. So, yeah, I don't know when else we are having the session. But those of you who are not in the group, please find yourself in the group, whether on our WhatsApp group or on Telegram group. At least those are the two places that I put the announcement. So if you're not in any of them, join at least the WhatsApp group. The reason why I don't really like it is if somebody joins afresh, they don't have access to the previous information. That's why I prefer Telegram. But then the Telegram group too, it's now a big group. And yeah, I mean, whatever, try and get into any of them. Today was overwhelming. I'll take time to assimilate. Yes, sorry for that. But yeah, find some time. Please, everybody should make time to go over this. And I don't know about when next, but hopefully I'll communicate this after Monday. I was supposed to travel, but it might not come on. So after Monday, I'll know whether we're going to be able to have some in the course of the week or not. And once more, what else is there? Do the assignments. Go and sit down and write the cycle that I showed you, exactly how it works, and share with me. Tracy, are you still here? I think Tracy has a blog. Those of you who have blogs, you can publish it on blogs. If you are on LinkedIn, you can write it on LinkedIn and share it with me. Or in fact, you can even write it as a GitHub README for your projects. Okay. Today was intense, interesting. Then I need to take this time to start over the two sessions. Yeah, guys, please rewatch it. I know, but remember that the lesson we've learned in this is not just for Django. We've learned a lot of things that are applicable to almost any web project, web app that you are building, which is very important. That's why I decided to take my time to do it. Okay. I think we would meet in the group. Thank you all for showing up. I really appreciate your time, and I'm grateful that you could spend the evening with me. And hopefully, we get to meet some other time sooner than I'm even thinking.